They called me the family disappointment for 15 years. The dropout. The quitter. The one who couldn't hack it when things got tough. My sister Sarah became the golden child, the military prodigy, the one whose uniform gleamed with fresh lieutenant bars, while I was just Marcus, the guy who worked some government job and kept his mouth shut at family dinners. But that morning at Fort Campbell, when Drill Sergeant Martinez snapped to attention and rendered the sharpest salute I'd seen in years, everything changed. The words that came out of his mouth, "General, sir," hit that training field like a thunderclap. And for the first time in over a decade, my little sister Sarah finally understood who I really was. Before I tell you what happened next, I need you to know something. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever felt misunderstood or underestimated by the people closest to you, let me know in the comments below. Sometimes the most powerful transformations happen in the shadows, away from spotlights and recognition ceremonies. And if you want to hear more stories about the hidden sacrifices that define real courage, consider subscribing. These are the stories that need to be told. But let me start at the beginning, because the real story isn't about that moment of recognition. It's about the decade of silence that led up to it. The morning started like any other family gathering, with me being invisible. I pulled into the driveway of our childhood home in Clarksville, Tennessee, just outside Fort Campbell's gate. The same gravel crunched under my rental car's tires. The same crooked mailbox read Thompson Family in faded block letters. The same pit formed in my stomach as I prepared to be the supporting character in my sister's latest success story. Sarah was graduating from officer candidate school, 26 years old, sharp as a blade, and everything our father had wanted in a military child. The house buzzed with preparation for her commissioning ceremony, pressed uniforms hanging in plastic, family photos being arranged just so, and Mom fussing over every detail, like this was the most important day in our family's history. Maybe at least, it was the most important day anyone in that house cared to acknowledge. Marcus. Mom's voice carried that particular blend of obligation and mild surprise that always greeted my arrivals. You made it. Sarah will be so happy, would she? I wondered as I grabbed my overnight bag from the trunk. Sarah and I had maintained the practiced politeness of siblings who'd grown apart, but happiness seemed like a strong word for whatever she felt about my presence at her milestone. Inside, the house smelled like furniture polish and the lavender potpourri Mom had been refreshing for 20 years. Everything looked exactly the same, frozen in time like a museum of my childhood. The same family photos lined the hallway: Sarah's high school graduation, her enlistment ceremony, various military training achievements, and then there was the conspicuous gap where my photos used to hang, back when I was still the golden child, back before I threw it all away. Where should I put my things? I asked, though I already knew the answer. The guest room, Mom said without looking up from her checklist. The guest room, not my old room, that had been converted into Sarah's home office years ago, complete with her military awards display case and combat boots lined up with mathematical precision. I climbed the stairs, each step creaking the same familiar protests, and found myself in what used to be Dad's study. The fold-out couch sat in the corner like an afterthought, and the walls were bare except for a generic landscape painting that screamed, "We had to put something here." Through the window I could see Fort Campbell's lights twinkling in the distance. Somewhere out there, in classified briefing rooms and secure communication centers, people knew who I really was. They knew about the operations I'd led, the decisions I'd made, the weight I carried. But here, in this house, I was just Marcus Thompson, the son who'd disappointed everyone by walking away from West Point in his final year. If they only knew. Her uniform was immaculate. Every crease sharp enough to cut paper, every button polished to mirror brightness. She commanded attention the moment she walked through the door, and our parents responded like iron filings to a magnet. "There's our lieutenant," Dad boomed, wrapping her in the kind of bear hug he used to give me when I came home from the academy, before everything changed, before I became the family cautionary tale. "Not yet, Dad." Sarah laughed, but her eyes sparkled with pride. "Tomorrow. Tonight I'm still just a candidate. Tonight you're still our daughter, Mom added, her voice thick with emotion. Our daughter who's about to become an officer in the United States Army. I stood in the kitchen doorway, holding a beer I'd grabbed from the fridge, watching this moment unfold like a movie I wasn't invited to participate in. This was their story. The dedicated daughter following in the military family tradition. The parents bursting with pride. The future bright with possibility and honor. Sarah noticed me then, her expression shifting to something between acknowledgement and duty. Hey Marcus. Thanks for coming. Wouldn't miss it, I replied, raising my beer in a small salute. Big day tomorrow. Yeah, she studied my face for a moment, and I wondered what she was looking for. Signs of resentment? Regret? Some hint of the brother she used to know, before I became the family mystery wrapped in a government security clearance. Dad clapped his hands together. Well, let's eat. Sarah needs her rest for tomorrow, and we need to celebrate our future officer. Dinner unfolded exactly as I'd expected. Sarah recounted stories from OCS, the challenges, the triumphs, the bonds forged with her fellow candidates. Mom and Dad hung on every word, asking questions, offering encouragement, living vicariously through their daughter's success. I contributed when directly asked, but mostly I observed. This was Sarah's night, and I had no intention of stealing her thunder. Besides, what was I going to say? Actually, I outrank everyone at Fort Campbell, except the commanding general. Those training exercises Sarah finds so challenging, I designed half the protocols being used. That distinguished visitor who spoke to her class last month, he reports to my joint task force. No, this was her moment. These people needed their family narrative to make sense, and my presence here was just enough participation to avoid being completely written out of the story. So Marcus, Dad said during a lull in the conversation, how's the, he gestured vaguely, the way he always did when referring to my work. How's the job going? Good, I replied, cutting another piece of Mom's pot roast. Keeping busy. Still can't talk about it, I assume. There was an edge to his voice that I'd grown accustomed to over the years. Frustration masked as casual interest. Not really. No. Sarah looked between us, sensing the familiar tension. What kind of work do you do again, Marcus? I know it's classified. I'd perfected this answer over the years. Defense contracting, analysis work. Nothing too exciting. The lie came easily now. It had to. The truth, that I held a top-secret SCI clearance, and had spent the last decade running covert operations across 3 continents, wasn't something I could share over dinner conversation. Even if I could, even if they had the clearance to hear it, I'm not sure they'd believe it. The brother who quit West Point 3 months before graduation, the son who walked away from a guaranteed Army commission, the family disappointment who'd thrown away everything our father had dreamed of. No, that person couldn't possibly be trusted with national security decisions that affected millions of lives. Well, Mom said, clearly trying to steer the conversation back to safer waters. We're just glad you could be here for Sarah's big day. Me too, I said, and I meant it. Despite everything, the misunderstandings, the silence, the weight of secrets I carried, Sarah was still my sister. She'd earned this moment through her own dedication and sacrifice, and she deserved to have her family there to witness it. Even if that family had no idea who I really was. That night, I lay on the fold-out couch staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the house settling around me. Through the thin walls I could hear Sarah moving around in her old room, probably going through her uniform one final time, making sure every detail was perfect for tomorrow's ceremony. My phone buzzed quietly on the nightstand. A text message from Colonel Patricia Hayes, my liaison at JSOC. Heard you're taking some personal time. Family thing? I typed back, sister's commissioning ceremony. Fort Campbell. That's sweet. Try to enjoy being a civilian for a few days. If she only knew how exhausting it was, pretending to be ordinary. In my professional life, I commanded respect through competence and results. Colonels sought my advice. Generals implemented my recommendations. Foreign allies trusted my judgment in matters of life and death. But here, in my childhood home, I was just Marcus Thompson, the disappointment, the quitter, the son who'd never lived up to his potential. Another buzz. This time it was Major David Kim from my old unit. Boss, We got the intel package you requested on the Kandahar situation. Want me to brief you remotely? I glanced at the time. 23:47 hours. In Afghanistan, it would be early morning, prime briefing time for operational plan. Negative, I replied. Handle it with Ramirez. I'm dark until Monday, unless it's urgent. Copy that. Enjoy your break, sir. Break. The word felt strange. When was the last time I'd actually taken time off? Real time off, not just the operational downtime between missions when I was planning the next deployment or analyzing after-action reports? I couldn't remember. My phone went dark, and the room fell back into silence. Tomorrow, Sarah would raise her right hand and take the oath of office, officially becoming Second Lieutenant Sarah Thompson, United States Army. She'd earned the title she'd worked so hard for, and our parents would beam with pride, and I would stand in the background, just another face in the crowd, carrying secrets that weighed more than all of Sarah's textbooks combined. But that was the job. That was the choice I'd made 15 years ago when I walked away from West Point. Not because I couldn't handle the pressure, not because I lacked dedication, but because I'd been recruited for something else. Something that required a different kind of sacrifice. The kind of sacrifice that meant letting your family think you were a failure. Because the truth was too dangerous to share. Because the story my family tells, the story about me cracking under pressure and throwing away my future, isn't even close to the truth. It was spring of my senior year, 3 months before graduation. I was ranked 15th in my class, had already received my assignment, the 82nd Airborne, and was planning to propose to my girlfriend Jessica right after commissioning. Life was mapped out in front of me like a perfectly executed military operation. That's when Professor Colonel James Mitchell called me into his office. Mitchell taught advanced strategic studies, but everyone knew his real expertise lay somewhere in the shadows between official military doctrine and the kind of operations that never made it into the history books. He had the bearing of someone who'd seen action, but his deployment records were mostly redacted. His security clearance was higher than anyone else on the faculty, including the superintendent. Cadet Thompson, he said as I reported to his office that Tuesday afternoon, close the door and take a seat. His office looked like every other faculty workspace: regulation furniture, framed certificates, photos with various military dignitaries. But I noticed details that most cadets would miss. The secure phone on his desk, the SEF-rated safe in the corner, the fact that his computer had no external network connections. This wasn't just a professor's office, this was an operational workspace. Sir, if this is about my thesis on asymmetric warfare tactics, it's not. He leaned back in his chair, studying me with the kind of intensity that suggested this conversation had been planned for a long time. Tell me, Cadet Thompson, what do you think happens to the problems the regular army can't solve? The question caught me off guard. The threats that exist in the gaps between conventional military doctrine and civilian law enforcement. The situations that require creative solutions. What do you think happens to those problems? I thought carefully before answering. This felt like more than an academic discussion. I suppose there are specialized units, sir. Special operations, intelligence agencies. And beyond that? Sir, I'm not sure I understand the question. Mitchell opened a folder on his desk. My folder, I realized. Seeing my cadet photo clipped to the inside cover. But this wasn't my standard academic file. This was thick, detailed, filled with evaluations I'd never seen before. Marcus Thompson, he read, exceptional strategic thinking. Adaptable, under pressure, natural leadership ability, but prefers leading from the shadows rather than taking credit. Comfortable with moral ambiguity when necessary for mission success. He looked up at me. These aren't observations from your tactical exercises, cadet. These are from scenarios you didn't know were being evaluated. A chill ran down my spine. Sir, the hostage simulation last semester, when you chose to let the terrorist escape rather than risk civilian casualties, even though it meant failing the exercise, that wasn't just training, Marcus, that was a test. I remembered that exercise. I'd been furious with myself for weeks afterward. convinced I'd shown weakness by prioritizing the safety of role-playing civilians over mission objectives. My tactical officer had given me a failing grade and a lecture about decisive leadership. The intelligence analysis project where you identified patterns that suggested your commanding officer was compromised. You could have kept quiet, earned your A, and graduated without making waves. Instead, you reported your concerns, even though it meant accusing a superior officer of treason. That project had nearly gotten me expelled. The compromised officer had been my favorite instructor, and my analysis had suggested he was feeding information to enemy forces. I'd agonized over whether to report it, knowing it could destroy my career before it even started. It turned out I was right. Major Stevens had been arrested quietly 2 weeks later. Every choice you've made here, every decision under pressure, has been observed and evaluated by people you've never met. And the conclusion is unanimous, Marcus. You have a very specific set of skills, and a very specific kind of moral compass, that makes you valuable for operations the United States military cannot officially acknowledge. My mouth went dry. What kind of operations, sir? Mitchell closed the folder. The kind that save lives by preventing wars. The kind that stop threats before they become headlines. The kind that require officers who can make impossible decisions and live with the consequences. Because the alternative is watching innocent people die. He stood and walked to the window overlooking the Hudson River. Cadets were moving across the grounds below, preparing for evening formation. My classmates. My friends. People who would graduate in 3 months and begin their conventional military careers. You have a choice to make, Marcus. You can accept your commission, serve honorably with the 82nd Airborne, and have a distinguished conventional military career. Or you can disappear. Officially, you'll be recorded as having suffered a psychological breakdown under academic pressure. Unofficially, you'll be dead. Marcus Thompson, West Point cadet, will cease to exist. And then you become someone else. Someone with a different name, a different background, a different purpose. You'll train for operations that don't exist, serve in units that don't officially operate, and protect people who will never know your name. The weight of what he was offering, no, what he was asking, settled over me like a heavy blanket. My family will think you failed. Will think you couldn't handle the pressure. Will think you threw away everything they believed in. His voice was gentle but firm. That's part of the sacrifice, Marcus. The people you love most will never understand the choices you make, because understanding would put them in danger. I stared out the window at the cadets below. Sarah was only 16 then, still in high school, still dreaming of following in my footsteps. She looked up to me, believed in me, thought I was everything a big brother should be. If I chose this path, she would grow up thinking I was a failure. How long do I have to decide? 24 hours. If you choose to accept, you'll begin experiencing academic difficulties immediately. Missed assignments, failed tests, behavioral problems. By graduation, your dismissal will seem inevitable to everyone who knows you. And if I refuse, you graduate on schedule. Become Second Lieutenant Thompson, serve with honor, live a normal life. He turned back to face me. And spend the rest of your career wondering what would have happened if you'd been brave enough to say yes. That night, I called Jessica. We talked for hours about our future together, about the life we were planning to build. She was so excited about my upcoming graduation, about our wedding, about the adventure of being a military spouse. I almost told her. The words were right there, ready to tumble out. I've been offered something else, something important, something that would change everything. But I couldn't, not because I wasn't allowed to, but because I knew what her answer would be. She'd beg me to choose the safe path, the conventional path, the path that led to a normal life together. And maybe she would have been right. The next morning, I walked back into Mitchell's office and said 2 words that changed my life forever. The transformation was gradual, but devastating to watch from the inside. Over the next 6 weeks, Marcus Thompson, model cadet, began to fall apart. It started with small things. Missed reveille formations due to oversleep, failed inspections because my uniform was slightly out of regulation, assignments turned in late, or with obvious errors that didn't match my previous academic performance. My tactical officer, Captain Rodriguez, called me into his office after the third consecutive week of declining performance. "Thompson, what the hell is going on with you? 3 months ago, you were on track for distinguished graduate honors. Now you're barely maintaining passing grade." The script had been provided, but delivering it still felt like swallowing glass. "I'm sorry, sir. I've been having trouble focusing. The pressure of graduation, the responsibility of becoming an officer. I think it's affecting my performance." Rodriguez studied me with genuine concern. He'd been my mentor for 2 years, had recommended me for leadership positions, had written glowing evaluations of my potential. Watching him lose faith in me was one of the hardest parts of the deception. "Have you considered speaking with the chaplain? Or perhaps medical services? There's no shame in seeking help, cadet." "I'll think about it, sir." But I wouldn't seek help, because help would mean revealing the truth. And the truth was that I was preparing for a mission that would require me to disappear completely. My classmates noticed the change too. Friends I'd known for 4 years began avoiding me, unsure how to handle my apparent breakdown. Study groups I'd led stopped inviting me. My girlfriend Jessica grew increasingly distant as I became someone she didn't recognize. "Marcus, what's happening to you?" she asked one evening, as we walked through the cadet area. "You're not the same person I fell in love with." And she was right. I wasn't. The person she'd fallen in love with was Marcus Thompson, West Point cadet, future Army officer. That person was being systematically dismantled to make room for someone else entirely. "Maybe we should take a break," I said, the words cutting through me like a blade. "Until I figure things out." She cried. I held her while she cried, knowing it was the last time I'd ever touch her, the last time I'd ever see the woman I'd planned to marry. Another sacrifice on the altar of national security. 3 days before graduation, I was called before an academic review board. The outcome was predetermined, but the process had to look legitimate. Colonel Williams, the chairman, read the charges with obvious regret. "Cadet Thompson, you stand accused of academic deficiency, failure to maintain military bearing, and conduct unbecoming a future officer. The board has reviewed your record and finds a pattern of declining performance consistent with psychological unfitness for commissioning." I stood at attention, letting the words wash over me. Around the table sat officers who had taught me, mentored me, believed in me. They looked at me with disappointment and confusion, unable to reconcile the failing cadet before them with the promising young officer they'd known. "It is the recommendation of this board that Cadet Thompson be dismissed from the United States Military Academy, effective immediately, for failure to meet the academic and military standards required of a commissioned officer." "I understand, sir." "Cadet Thompson, do you have anything to say in your defense?" This was my last chance. I could tell them the truth, reveal the deception, save my reputation and relationships. I could graduate with my class, marry Jessica, become the officer everyone expected me to be. Instead, I said, "No, sir. I accept the board's decision." That evening, I packed my belongings while my roommate watched in stunned silence. 4 years of memories, relationships, achievements, all being reduced to a few boxes and a duffel bag. "I don't understand, Marcus," he said. "You were the best of us. How did it come to this?" I wished I could tell him. I wished I could explain that sometimes the best thing you can do for your country is let people think you're a failure. That sometimes protecting others means sacrificing your own reputation, your own relationships, your own sense of self. Instead, I said, "Sometimes people just crack under pressure, I guess." The next morning, while my classmates prepared for graduation, I drove away from West Point for the last time. In the rearview mirror, I watched the gray stone buildings disappear behind the trees, taking with them everything I'd thought I wanted from life. But ahead of me lay something else entirely. something that would test every principle I'd learned at the academy in ways no textbook could prepare me for. 2 days later, Marcus Thompson died in a car accident on a remote highway in Montana. The funeral was closed casket, very few people attended. And 3 days after that, someone else entirely reported for duty at a classified location that doesn't appear on any map. Located in the mountains of Colorado, it looked like a corporate retreat center from the outside. Modern buildings nestled among pine trees, hiking trails winding through scenic valleys, the kind of place tech companies might send their executives for team-building exercise. The similarity was intentional. The best way to hide something is to make it look like something ordinary. I arrived there as David Martinez, a former Marine Corps sergeant who'd been recruited for specialized security work. The transformation from Marcus Thompson to David Martinez had taken place over several weeks of careful preparation, new social security number, fabricated employment history, even a set of personal relationships and memories that had been crafted by psychologists and social engineers. The other trainees called me sergeant out of habit, though we'd all technically left our military ranks behind when we walked through those doors. There were 8 of us in the inaugural class, former officers and NCOs from various branches, all selected for specific psychological profiles and skill sets. Sarah Chen had been a Navy intelligence officer before her official death in a training accident. Michael Rodriguez was ex-Air Force Special Operations, reported killed in action during a humanitarian mission in Africa. Each of us had been carefully extracted from our previous lives, mourned by our families, and reborn as someone else entirely. The training was unlike anything I'd experienced at West Point, or in any military school, where conventional military education focused on leadership, strategy, and tactical operations. Our curriculum delved into darker territory. Week 1. Advanced interrogation techniques and psychological manipulation. Week 2. Deep cover identity maintenance and social engineering. Week 3. Assassination methods and deniability protocols. Week 4. Economic warfare and infrastructure sabotage. Our instructors were people who officially didn't exist, teaching us skills that no military manual would acknowledge. They had names like Professor Smith and Colonel Johnson, but I suspected those weren't their real identities any more than David Martinez was mine. The key to successful covert operations, Professor Smith explained during a lecture on behavioral psychology, is understanding that people see what they expect to see. If you look like a businessman, act like a businessman, and think like a businessman, then you are a businessman, until the moment you choose to be something else. We practiced this constantly. Role-playing exercises where we'd spend weeks living as insurance salesmen, or computer programmers or graduate students, building fictional lives so complete that we almost believed them ourselves. Then at a predetermined signal, we'd have to seamlessly transition into operational mode, extracting intelligence, neutralizing threats, or disappearing entirely. The psychological toll was immense. After 3 months of training, I found it difficult to remember which memories were real and which had been implanted. Did Marcus Thompson actually have a golden retriever named Scout as a child? Or was that part of David Martinez's fabricated background? Had I really broken my arm falling out of a tree when I was 10? Or was that someone else's memory that had been woven into my new identity? It's normal, Dr. Patricia Vance assured me during one of our mandatory psychological evaluations. Identity fluidity is a necessary adaptation for this type of work. The goal isn't to maintain your original sense of self, it's to develop the ability to become whoever the mission requires. But how do I know who I really am? She smiled, but there was sadness in her eyes. That's the question that separates people who can do this job from people who can't. The successful operatives learn to accept that identity is a tool, not a permanent fixture. You become who you need to be, when you need to be them. 6 months into training, I was given my first field exercise. I was to spend 2 weeks in Denver, living as Thomas Baker, a freelance journalist, researching a story about urban development. My mission was to gain access to a specific construction company's internal documents and identify which city council members were taking bribes. The transition was seamless. I rented an apartment, set up a workspace, began conducting interviews with local officials and business leaders. Within a week, I had built a reputation as a thorough, trustworthy reporter. City council members were returning my call. Construction executives were inviting me to lunch. On day 10, I sat in the office of Richard Caldwell, the construction company's CEO, reviewing blueprints and contracts that detailed millions of dollars in municipal corruption. He trusted me completely, saw me as nothing more than a journalist doing his job. Off the record, he said, leaning back in his leather chair, half the city council is in our pocket, has been for years, but that's just how business gets done in this town. I nodded sympathetically, making notes in my reporter's notebook. Inside, another part of my mind was calculating how this information would be used, which officials would be quietly pressured to resign, which contracts would be mysteriously cancelled, which careers would be destroyed to protect the integrity of municipal government. I appreciate your candor, Mr. Caldwell. This kind of context really helps readers understand how these development projects move forward. He laughed. Just make sure I look good in your article. My wife reads everything written about the company. 3 days later, Thomas Baker filed his final articles and disappeared. Richard Caldwell was arrested the following week. The corruption network was dismantled within a month. And I returned to the farm for debriefing, having successfully completed my first mission as someone who didn't exist. Advanced training continued for another 1.5 years. We learned languages. I became fluent in Arabic and Farsi, conversational in Russian and Mandarin. We studied cultures, religions, political systems, economic structures. We memorized the psychological profiles of world leaders, the command structures of terrorist organizations, the vulnerabilities of critical infrastructure systems. Most importantly, we learned to compartmentalize. The person who could sit across from a terrorist financier at a cafe in Istanbul, gaining his trust over weeks of careful relationship building, was not the same person who would ensure that financier never made it home that night. Those were different identities, different moral frameworks, different people who happened to share the same body. Cognitive dissonance is your enemy, Colonel Johnson warned us during a lecture on operational psychology. The moment you start questioning whether your actions align with your values, you become compromised. You must learn to hold multiple truths simultaneously without allowing them to conflict. It sounded like philosophical theory, but it became practical reality during our final exercise. Each trainee was assigned a long-term deep cover mission that would serve as both graduation requirement and first operational deployment. My assignment was to infiltrate an arms trafficking network operating out of Eastern Europe. I would spend 6 months as Eric Volkov, a former Spetsnaz operator turned mercenary, building relationships within the criminal underworld until I could identify and eliminate the network's leadership. The mission brief was comprehensive. Volkov's background, personality, skills, even his personal preferences and psychological quirks. I studied it like an actor preparing for a role, except the performance would last half a year, and mistakes could be fatal. Remember, my handler told me during the final briefing, Eric Volkov is not a character you're playing. He's a real person with real motivations and real relationships. The criminals you'll be working with are experts at detecting deception. If you think of yourself as Marcus Thompson pretending to be Eric Volkov, they'll spot you immediately. And if I think of myself as Eric Volkov, then you'll survive long enough to complete the mission. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in a bar in Prague, speaking Russian with a slight Ukrainian accent, negotiating the purchase of shoulder-fired missiles with men who would kill me without hesitation if they suspected I was anything other than exactly what I appeared to be. And for those 6 months, I wasn't anything other than exactly what I appeared to be. Eric Volkov was ruthless, pragmatic, and completely immoral. He had no family, no emotional attachments, no loyalty to any cause beyond profit. He could watch torture without flinching and order executions without hesitation. Marcus Thompson would have been horrified by the things Eric Volkov did. David Martinez might have questioned the necessity of those actions, but Eric Volkov simply did his job with professional efficiency. When the mission ended, with the arms network dismantled and its leaders dead or imprisoned, Eric Volkov disappeared as completely as Marcus Thompson. The man who returned to the United States for debriefing was someone else entirely, someone who carried pieces of all these identities but belonged completely to none of them. Congratulations, my handler said as I completed my final psychological evaluation. You're officially graduated from the program. As of tomorrow, you'll receive your first assignment as a fully operational deep cover specialist. What's my designation? He smiled. You don't get a designation. Designations imply that you exist in some official capacity. From now on, you're whoever the mission requires you to be. Your only permanent identity is your security clearance level and your handler contact information. That night I sat in my temporary quarters thinking about the path that had brought me here. 3 years ago, I'd been Marcus Thompson, West Point cadet, destined for a conventional military career. Now I was, what exactly? A highly trained weapon in human form, a ghost in the machine of national security, a person who existed only in the spaces between official reality and necessary fiction. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. New assignment. Briefing tomorrow. 0. Congratulations on your graduation. M for Mitchell. I assume. The professor who had started this journey with a single question about what happened to problems the regular army couldn't solve. Now I was one of the solutions to those problems. Now I was the person who handled situations that couldn't be officially acknowledged. Threats that didn't fit into conventional categories. Missions that required someone who could be anyone, and no one simultaneously. And somewhere in Tennessee, my family was probably still talking about their disappointment. Marcus, the son who'd thrown away everything. The brother who'd never lived up to his potential. If they only knew what their disappointment had become. The missions blurred together after the first few years. I was a diplomat in Syria, gathering intelligence on chemical weapons programs. I was a businessman in Nigeria, disrupting terrorist financing networks. I was a graduate student in Iran, recruiting assets within the nuclear program. Each identity was meticulously crafted, lived completely, then discarded when the operation ended. The work was important. I saved lives, prevented attacks, protected American interests in ways that would never make headlines. But the cost was becoming increasingly difficult to calculate. I missed my father's funeral because I was deep undercover in Somalia, dismantling a piracy network that threatened international shipping lanes. The mission was successful. Maritime attacks in the region dropped by 70% over the following year. But I wasn't there when my family needed me. Wasn't there to carry his casket or deliver a eulogy or comfort my mother in her grief. Instead, I found out about his death 3 weeks later, when my handler briefed me during exfiltration. Personal notification, he said, handing me a sealed envelope. I'm sorry for your loss. The funeral program was inside, along with a sympathy card signed by Sarah and my mother. We understand you couldn't make it because of work, my mother had written. Dad knew you loved him, even though you couldn't be here. The assumptions hurt more than the absence. They thought I'd skipped the funeral because my mysterious government job was more important than family. They thought I'd chosen work over grieving with them. They had no idea that I'd been risking my life to protect shipping lanes that kept global commerce flowing, that the food on their table and the fuel in their cars depended in part on missions like mine. But I couldn't tell them, could only let them believe what they needed to believe. That became the pattern of my life, missing birthdays because I was in Afghanistan, missing holidays because I was in Yemen, missing graduations and weddings and anniversaries because somewhere in the world, there was always another problem that required someone who didn't officially exist to solve it. The promotions came regularly but invisibly. My security clearance level increased. My operational authority expanded. The missions became more complex, more consequential, more sensitive. By my 8th year in the program, I was running operations across multiple continents, coordinating with foreign intelligence services, briefing cabinet-level officials who were never told my real name. I had an apartment in Virginia that I saw maybe 6 weeks out of every year. The refrigerator contained only beer and condiment. The closet held clothes for 3 different cover identities and a single dress uniform I'd worn exactly once, to a classified awards ceremony where I received a medal that couldn't be publicly acknowledged. Loneliness was an occupational hazard, but relationships were prohibited for security reasons. The few times I'd tried to build connections, carefully, maintaining operational security, the compartmentalization had made intimacy impossible. How do you love someone when you can't tell them who you are? How do you build trust when your entire existence is based on deception? It's the price we pay, Colonel Hayes told me during one of our quarterly psychological evaluations. She'd become my primary handler after Mitchell retired, and she understood the personal costs of the work better than most. Some people sacrifice their bodies for their country, some sacrifice their wealth or their comfort. We sacrifice our identities. Do you ever regret it? She considered the question carefully. I regret the things I've missed, the relationships I couldn't have, the life I couldn't live, but I don't regret the work itself, the threats we stop, the lives we save. That has to be enough. It was enough, most of the time. When I prevented a dirty bomb attack in London, when I disrupted an assassination plot against African leaders, when I helped negotiate the release of kidnapped civilians, in those moments, the sacrifices felt meaningful. The loneliness was the price of security, anonymity was the cost of effectiveness. But late at night, in hotel rooms across the world, I sometimes found myself wondering what Marcus Thompson's life would have looked like. Would he have been happy with Jessica? Would they have had children? Would he have been the kind of uncle who taught his sister's kids to throw a baseball and told them stories about their grandfather's military service? Those thoughts were dangerous. Nostalgia was a weakness that could compromise operation. The person I'd been before didn't matter. Only the person the mission required mattered. Still, I kept track of my family from a distance. Sarah graduated from college and entered the army as promised. My mother remarried a good man, who made her laugh and took care of her garden. They built lives that moved forward without me. Lives that were better for my absence because my presence would have brought complications they couldn't understand. They sent Christmas cards to my apartment address, never knowing I was reading them from Afghanistan, or Pakistan, or wherever the mission had taken me. Sarah wrote about her training, her first assignment, her hopes for her military career. Mom wrote about her garden, her book club, her volunteer work at the Veterans Hospital. They were living normal lives, peaceful lives, the kind of lives my work was designed to protect. And if protecting those lives meant they could never know who I really was, that seemed like a fair trade. At least, it did until the morning I got the call that changed everything. It was Sarah who called, which was unusual. We rarely spoke directly. Most communication happened through Christmas cards and birthday messages passed through Mom. But her voice on the phone was excited, proud, alive with the kind of joy I remembered from our childhood. Marcus, I have news. I was in a safe house in Prague at the time, recovering from a mission that had ended badly but successfully. 3 terrorists were dead. A planned attack on a NATO summit had been prevented, and I had 2 broken ribs and a concussion to show for it. Hey Sarah, what's going on? I'm graduating from officer candidate school next month. Can you believe it? Mom says you might actually be able to make it this time. The hope in her voice was like a knife between my ribs. I'd missed so many of her milestones over the years. High school graduation, college graduation, her enlistment ceremony, always because of missions that couldn't be delayed, operations that required my specific skills at exactly the wrong moments. That's amazing, Sarah. I'm really proud of you. So you'll come? It's at Fort Campbell and I know you're busy with work. But, I looked at my operational calendar. No active missions scheduled for the next month. No deep cover assignments requiring extended preparation. For the first time in years, I might actually be able to attend a family event. I'll be there, I promised. Wouldn't miss it. The silence on the other end stretched long enough that I thought we'd lost connection. Then Sarah's voice came back, softer now, vulnerable in a way I hadn't heard since she was a child. Really? You're really going to be there? Really, Marcus? Can I ask you something? Always. Do you ever regret it? Leaving West Point, I mean. Giving up your commission? The question hit harder than I'd expected. How do you explain that the thing she thought was your greatest failure was actually your greatest sacrifice? How do you tell your sister that you'd given up everything she now aspired to because your country needed you to do something else entirely? It's complicated, Sarah, but no, I don't regret it. I ended up where I needed to be. I always wondered if you resented me for following the path you couldn't finish, for becoming the officer you were supposed to be. The pain in her voice was unmistakable. She'd been carrying guilt about my failure for years, thinking she'd somehow stolen my dreams by pursuing her own. The irony was devastating. She felt guilty for achieving something I'd given up voluntarily, something I'd walked away from to protect people like her. Sarah, listen to me. I am so proud of what you've accomplished. You didn't take anything from me. You earned this through your own hard work and dedication. Don't let anyone, including me, diminish that. But you were supposed to be the soldier in the family. Everyone said so. You were the one with the potential, the leadership ability, and you have all of those things too. Maybe more than I ever did. I meant it. From what I'd observed from a distance, Sarah had developed into exactly the kind of officer the army needed. Principled, dedicated, smart enough to question orders when necessary, but disciplined enough to follow them when they were right. I love you, Marcus. And I'm sorry things didn't work out the way you planned. I love you too. And Sarah? Things worked out exactly the way they were supposed to. After we hung up, I sat in the Prague safe house, thinking about the weight of secrets, the cost of deception, the price of love that could never be fully expressed. In 3 weeks I would stand in the audience at Fort Campbell, watching my sister take the oath of office, knowing that she was everything our father had wanted in a military child. And she would never know that her failure of a brother outranked every officer on that parade ground. Fort Campbell, on commissioning day, was exactly what I remembered from my own brief time as a conventional officer. All spit and polish, proud families, and young people taking their first steps into military service. The morning air was crisp with Kentucky autumn, and the parade ground gleamed under spotless blue skies. I arrived early, wearing civilian clothes that struck the right balance between respectful and unremarkable. Khaki slacks, navy blazer, conservative tie, the uniform of the supportive family member who wanted to look appropriate without drawing attention. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, dressed down to blend in with civilians, while wearing a security clearance level that exceeded everyone on base except the commanding general. My real uniform, if I still owned one that reflected my actual rank, would have drawn stares and questions I couldn't answer. The bleachers filled with families as I found a seat in the middle section, far enough from the front to avoid prominence but close enough to see Sarah clearly. Around me, parents and siblings chatted excitedly about their soon-to-be officers, sharing stories of the journey that had brought them here. Our son was always destined for this, the woman next to me was saying to her husband. Even as a child, he had that leadership quality, that sense of duty. I smiled politely, wondering what she would think if she knew that the quiet man beside her had led operations that prevented terrorist attacks in 12 countries. That leadership came in many forms, most of which would never be recognized in ceremonies like this. The candidates marched onto the field with precision that would have made their drill sergeants proud. They moved as one unit, their uniforms immaculate, their bearing confident. And there, in the third row, was Sarah, standing tall, shoulders back, eyes focused straight ahead with the kind of intensity I remembered from my own commissioning dreams. She looked like Dad, the same strong jawline, the same determined expression, the same natural bearing that said, I was born to lead soldiers. For a moment I could see him standing beside her in spirit, pride radiating from his memory like heat from summer pavement. The ceremony proceeded with traditional military pageantry, speeches about duty and honor and sacrifice, presentations of awards for outstanding performance during training, the playing of the national anthem while families stood with hands over hearts, some crying with pride, others stoic with the weight of what their children were undertaking. Finally, the moment everyone had come to see, one by one, the candidates stepped forward to take the oath of office. Their families strained to capture every word with phone cameras and proud smiles. When Sarah's turn came, she walked to the podium with the same confident stride I'd seen her use since childhood. The oath was administered by Colonel Patricia Hayes, my own handler, though Sarah had no way of knowing that connection. I, Sarah Elizabeth Thompson, do solemnly swear. I watched my sister promise to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, to bear true faith and allegiance to the country we both served, to discharge her duties with honor and integrity. The words were the same ones I'd never gotten to speak, the oath that had been taken from me when I chose a different path. But hearing them spoken by my sister, seeing the pride in her eyes as she raised her right hand, I realized something important. The oath didn't require a ceremony to be real. I'd been living those words for over a decade, defending the Constitution in ways that couldn't be publicly acknowledged. Sarah was joining me in that service, even though she didn't know it. After the ceremony, families gathered on the field to congratulate their new officers and take photos. I hung back, watching from a distance as Sarah embraced our mother, posed for pictures with her new lieutenant's bars gleaming in the sunlight, and accepted congratulations from friends and fellow officers. She looked around the crowd, scanning faces, and I knew she was looking for me. I stepped forward, making myself visible, and her face lit up with genuine joy. "Marcus, you made it." She rushed over and wrapped me in a hug that nearly knocked me off balance. "I can't believe you're actually here. Told you I wouldn't miss." I held her at arm's length, studying the silver bars on her shoulders. "Second Lieutenant Thompson has a nice ring to it. It feels surreal, like I'm playing dress-up in a grown-up's uniform. You'll grow into it." Dad always said the best officers are the ones who understand the weight of what they're carrying. Sarah's expression grew serious. "I wish he could have been here." "He was," I assured her. "In every value he taught you, every principle he believed in. He's here in the officer you've become." Mom joined us then, her face glowing with maternal pride. "Both my children together for Sarah's big day. Your father would have loved this. Would he?" I wonder. Would he have been proud to know that both his children were serving their country, even if only one of them could be publicly acknowledged? Or would he have been disappointed that I couldn't share the details of my own service, couldn't explain why I'd walked away from the conventional path he'd wanted for me? "Let's get some pictures," Mom suggested, pulling out her phone. "I want to remember this moment forever." We posed for several photos, Sarah in her dress blues, me in my civilian clothes, Mom beaming between us. Standard family photos that would go in albums and frames, preserving a moment that meant different things to each of us. Sarah meant to capture her achievement, her entry into the officer corps, the fulfillment of a dream she'd held since childhood. Mom meant to capture her pride in both her children, the joy of having us together for once, the satisfaction of seeing Sarah follow in her father's footsteps. I meant to capture what might be the last time I could stand beside my sister as her brother, before operational requirements pulled me back into the shadows where I belonged. "I'm starving," Sarah announced after the photos. "Want to grab lunch somewhere?" My treat, to celebrate having my big brother here for once. "Actually," Mom interjected, "I made reservations at that steakhouse you love. The whole family needs to celebrate properly." Family, the word hit me harder than it should have. For a decade I'd been part of a different kind of family, handlers, and operators and assets who understood the weight of secrets, who shared the burden of invisible service. But this was my blood family, the people who'd shaped me before I became someone else entirely. "Sounds perfect," I said. Lunch was everything I'd forgotten family gatherings could be. Sarah was animated, telling stories about her training experiences, her fellow candidates, her hopes for her first assignment. Mom was radiant, asking questions and offering encouragement, living vicariously through her daughter's success. And I was present, actually present, not mentally calculating exit strategies or maintaining cover identities or analyzing threats. For 2 hours, I was just Marcus Thompson, Sarah's older brother, proud and supportive and genuinely happy to be sharing this moment. "So what's next for Lieutenant Thompson?" I asked as we finished our steaks. "Fort Campbell, actually. I'm assigned to the 101st Airborne. Can you believe it? I'll be practically in my own backyard." "That's fantastic." Dad served with the 101st for a while. He always spoke highly of the division. "I know, that's part of why I requested it." Sarah's expression grew thoughtful. "I keep thinking about all the family stories, all the traditions I'm now part of. It feels like I'm carrying something bigger than just my own career." She was, of course. She was carrying the weight of family legacy, military tradition, and her own personal dreams all at once. But she was also carrying something else she didn't know about, the pride of a brother who understood exactly what that weight felt like. "You'll do great," I told her. "The Thompson family has a history of producing good soldiers." "Even the Thompson family members who couldn't finish the job?" she asked gently. The question was meant as self-deprecating humor, but it cut deep. She was still carrying guilt about my failure at West Point, still wondering if she was somehow taking my place in the family military tradition. Especially them, I said firmly. Sometimes the most important service happens in ways that can't be celebrated publicly. Mom reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Your father never blamed you for leaving West Point, Mark. He always said that sometimes life takes unexpected turns, and the important thing is making the best of where you end up. Did he really say that? He said you were the strongest person he knew, because you found a way to keep serving your country even after your plans fell through. He was proud of the work you do, even though he didn't understand it. The emotion hit me like a physical blow. All these years I'd assumed my father was disappointed in me, ashamed of my apparent failure, confused by my mysterious career. But maybe he'd understood more than I gave him credit for. Maybe he'd seen something in my choices that I'd never thought to explain. I miss him, I said quietly. He missed you too, especially at the end. Mom's voice grew soft. He kept asking if you were safe, wherever you. I think he knew your work was dangerous, even if he didn't know the details. Sarah was watching this exchange with growing intensity, her analytical mind processing information and drawing conclusions. Marcus, can I ask you something personal? Shoot, do you ever wish you could tell us more about what you actually do? I mean, I know it's classified, but don't you get tired of being mysterious all the time? The question struck at the heart of everything I'd been thinking about during lunch. The loneliness of secrecy, the cost of compartmentalization, the weight of being permanently misunderstood by the people who mattered most. More than you know, I admitted, but some things are classified for good reasons. Sometimes protecting the people you love means they can't know how you're protecting them. That sounds really lonely. It can be, but it's also meaningful. Knowing that the work matters, even if no one can acknowledge it. Sarah studied my face with the kind of intensity I recognized from my own operational training. She was putting pieces together, seeing patterns, asking questions that came dangerously close to truths I couldn't reveal. Marcus, the work you do, it's not just defense contracting, is it? The moment hung suspended between us like a bridge. Neither of us was sure we should cross. I could deflect, change the subject, maintain the fiction that had kept my family safe for over a decade, or I could trust my sister with something closer to the truth. It's complicated, I said finally. Try me. I'm an officer in the United States Army now. I have a security clearance. I understand complicated. Mom was watching our exchange with growing concern. Maybe we should talk about something else. No, Sarah interrupted gently. I've spent my whole adult life wondering about my brother, feeling guilty about surpassing his military achievements, trying to understand why someone as capable as Marcus would just give up. I think I deserve to know who he really is. The restaurant around us faded into background noise. This was the moment I'd been dreading and hoping for simultaneously. The moment when the choice between truth and security became unavoidable. Sarah, I said carefully, if I told you that everything you think you know about my military career is incomplete, would you believe me? What do you mean? I mean that sometimes the most important questions are the ones you're not allowed to ask, and sometimes the people who appear to have failed have actually succeeded in ways that can't be measured by conventional standards. Her eyes widened as the implications began to sink in. Are you saying I'm saying that there's more to every story than what appears in official records? And sometimes the most devoted service is the kind that requires people to think you've failed. The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken understanding. Sarah was an intelligence officer. She knew how to read between lines, how to extract meaning from carefully worded non-denials. Holy shit, she whispered. Language, Sarah, Mom said automatically, but her own expression suggested she was beginning to understand the scope of what we weren't discussing. How long? Sarah asked quietly. Since West Point, the breakdown, the dismissal, necessary fiction. She leaned back in her chair, processing the revelation. I've been serving my country in ways that can't be publicly acknowledged. Just like you're about to do, except your service gets ceremonies and recognition and family pride. And yours gets the satisfaction of knowing it matters. Most of the time that's enough. Sarah reached across the table and grabbed my hand with surprising strength. I'm so sorry. All these years, we all thought, You thought exactly what you were supposed to think. That was the point. But the cost, the loneliness, the misunderstanding, letting us believe, was worth it, is worth it, will continue to be worth it. I squeezed her hand back. Sarah, the work I do helps keep officers like you safe in the field. If maintaining my cover means letting my family think I'm a disappointment, that's a price I'm willing to pay. Mom was crying quietly, understanding finally dawning on her face. The missed funerals, the cancelled visits, the mysterious phone calls at all hours. Duty, I said simply, just a different kind of duty than the kind that gets paraded. Sarah was staring at me with new eyes, seeing not the family failure, but the brother who'd been protecting her without recognition for over a decade. What rank? She began, then stopped herself. Never mind. I probably don't have clearance for that information. Probably not, I agreed with a small smile. But you outrank me. Let's just say that your big brother didn't actually throw away his military career. He just exchanged it for something else. The drive back to Fort Campbell was subdued, each of us processing the afternoon's revelations in our own way. I'd revealed more to my family than I'd ever intended, skirted closer to classified information than my training allowed. But seeing the relief in Sarah's eyes, the pride returning to Mom's expression, felt worth the security risk. I want to show you something, Sarah said, as we approached the base gates. My unit is conducting training exercises this week. Would you like to see what your tax dollars are paying for? I almost declined automatically. Operational security demanded that I minimize exposure to military personnel who might recognize me. But something in Sarah's voice suggested this wasn't just a casual invitation. Sure, I said, I'd like that. The training area was a hive of activity when we arrived. Soldiers in combat gear moved through tactical exercises, while instructors observed and critiqued their performance. The familiar sounds of military training, shouted commands, equipment rattling, boots on gravel, brought back memories of my own conventional training days. There's my platoon. Sarah pointed to a group of soldiers practicing urban warfare techniques in a mock village. Sergeant Martinez is running them through building clearance procedures. Sergeant Martinez. The name was familiar, though I couldn't immediately place it. Then I saw him, a Latino man in his early 30s, built like a linebacker, with the kind of command presence that made soldiers want to follow him into combat. And as he turned to scan the training area, his eyes landed on me and went wide with recognition. This was the moment I'd been dreading. Martinez wasn't just any NCO, he was Master Sergeant Carlos Martinez, formerly of the 75th Ranger Regiment, who'd participated in a joint operation I'd commanded in Syria 3 years earlier. He knew me as Colonel Davidson, the special operations officer who'd led that mission. For a long second we stared at each other across the training field. I could see the wheels turning in his mind, recognizing my face but struggling to reconcile my civilian clothes with his memories of our military interactions. Then training kicked in, both his and mine. He was smart enough to realize that if I was here in civilian clothes, there was a reason for it, and I was experienced enough to know that the next few moments would determine whether my cover could be maintained. Martinez made his decision. He called his soldiers to attention, gave them new instructions, and began walking purposefully toward our small group. Oh good, Sarah said, noticing his approach. I'll introduce you to my drill sergeant, Sergeant Martinez. This is my brother Marcus, the one I told you about. Martinez came to a stop 3 feet away from us, his posture somewhere between military bearing and civilian relaxation. His eyes met mine, and I saw the moment of decision. Marcus Thompson, he said carefully. Sarah's told me a lot about you. All bad, I hope, I replied with what I hoped was an appropriately civilian smile. Actually, she mentioned you work for the government. Defense contracting, right? Something like that. We shook hands, and Martinez applied just enough pressure to let me know he recognized me without making it obvious to Sarah. He was giving me an opportunity to maintain my cover, showing the kind of discretion that had made him valuable in special operations. But Sarah was watching our interaction with the sharp attention of a newly minted intelligence officer. She was picking up on subtle cues, noticing things that civilian family members might miss. Sergeant Martinez, she said slowly, you seem familiar with my brother's work. Martinez glanced at me, seeking guidance. This was the moment when my carefully maintained civilian cover could collapse entirely, when years of operational security could be compromised by a chance encounter on my sister's training field. I made my choice. Sarah, I said quietly, I need to ask you to step away for a moment. There's something Sergeant Martinez and I need to discuss privately. Her eyebrows rose, but she was military now. She understood that some conversations required privacy. Of course, I'll go check on the other exercises. When she was out of earshot, Martinez spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. Colonel Davidson, I wasn't told you'd be in the area. I'm not. Officially, I'm Marcus Thompson, Sarah's civilian brother, here for her commissioning ceremony. Understood, sir. But the resemblance is… He paused. Are you related to Lieutenant Thompson? She's my sister. And Sergeant, this conversation never happened. Martinez nodded. Copy that, sir. But I have to say, she's one hell of an officer. Reminds me of someone I used to serve with. Take care of her, Sergeant. She's important to me. Roger that. Sigh? He caught himself. I mean, Mr. Thompson. We'll take good care of her. As Martinez walked back to his training exercises, I realized that my cover had just become exponentially more complicated. Having family members serve at the same installation where I'd conducted operations was a security nightmare I'd never had to navigate before. But it was also something else, an opportunity. For the first time in my career, someone I cared about would be protected by people who knew exactly who I was and what I'd sacrificed. Martinez would watch out for Sarah not just because she was a good officer, but because she was the sister of a man who'd earned his respect in combat. Sarah returned a few minutes later, her expression thoughtful. Interesting conversation. Just talking shop, I said. Government work, you know how it is. Marcus, she said carefully. Sergeant Martinez looked at you the way soldiers look at officers they've served with, and not junior officers. The observation was too accurate for comfort. My sister was developing into exactly the kind of intelligence analyst who could piece together operational security failures from small inconsistencies. Sarah, I know. Questions I'm not allowed to ask. She smiled, but her eyes were serious. But Marcus, whatever it is you actually do, whoever you actually are, I'm proud of you. And I'm grateful. For what? For letting me believe I was following in your footsteps when really you've been walking ahead of me the whole time. The training exercises continued around us, but I barely noticed. For the first time in over a decade, someone in my family understood, not the details, not the specifics, but the essential truth. I hadn't failed. I hadn't given up. I'd simply chosen a different path to serve the same ideals we'd both been raised to value. It wasn't complete honesty. There were still secrets I'd carry to my grave, operations she could never know about, decisions that would horrify her if she understood their necessity. But it was closer to truth than I'd ever been able to share with family before, and for now, that was enough. The sun was setting over Fort Campbell, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with military bases as a child. Something about the way the light hit the flagpoles, the orderly rows of buildings, the sense of purpose that permeated everything. Marcus, Sarah said as I opened the driver's door, can I ask you one more question? Always. The path you chose, do you ever regret it? Not just the secrecy and the loneliness, but the whole thing? Walking away from a normal life, a normal military career. I thought about the question as I'd learned to think about all difficult questions, from multiple angles, considering not just the emotional truth, but the operational implications of my answer. I regret the cost, I said finally. I regret missing Dad's funeral, missing your high school graduation, missing all the moments that make a family close. I regret that you spent years feeling guilty about my failure. I regret that Mom worried about me without understanding why. But I don't regret the choice itself. The work I do, Sarah, I can't give you specifics, but I can tell you that the operations I've been involved in have prevented attacks that would have killed thousands of people. They've stopped wars before they started, disrupted terrorist networks, protected American assets around the world, and that's worth the personal cost. It's worth the personal cost to me. Whether it's worth it objectively, that's a question I'm not qualified to answer. That's a question for historians and philosophers, and people with more wisdom than I'll ever have. Sarah leaned against the car, processing my words. The night I decided to enlist, I called you. Do you remember? I did remember. I'd been in a safe house in Karachi, debriefing from a mission that had gone sideways but ultimately successful. Sarah's call had come through during a rare moment of downtime, and her excitement about joining the army had been both heartening and heartbreaking. You asked me if I thought you were making the right choice, I said. And you told me that service was about more than personal advancement, that it was about being part of something bigger than yourself, even when that service required sacrifice. She smiled. I thought you were talking about the army in general. But you were talking about your own experience, weren't you? Maybe. Probably. Everything you've told me, everything I've figured out, it explains so much. Why you always seem to understand military culture even though you supposedly washed out. Why you never seemed bitter about leaving West Point. Why your phone calls sometimes came from strange area codes at weird hours. I hadn't realized how much she'd been observing, how many clues I'd inadvertently provided over the years. My sister was more perceptive than I'd given her credit for. Sarah, the most important thing you need to understand is that this conversation can never be repeated. Not to Mom, not to your fellow officers, not to anyone. The kind of work I do requires complete operational security. I understand. Her voice was firm, professional. Marcus, I'm an Army intelligence officer now. I understand classified information and need to know protocols. Whatever you've told me today, whatever I've figured out, it stays between us. Good, because if it doesn't, it could get you killed, and it could compromise operations that protect American lives. She straightened to attention, not the exaggerated posture of a new officer trying to impress, but the natural bearing of someone who understood the weight of what she was carrying. I've got this, Marcus. You can trust me. Looking at her then, standing tall in her dress blues, her face serious with newfound understanding, I realized that my little sister had grown into exactly the kind of officer I would want to serve alongside. She had the intelligence to understand complex situations, the discretion to handle sensitive information, and the moral foundation to make difficult decisions when necessary. I do trust you, I said. And Sarah, for what it's worth, Dad would have been incredibly proud of the officer you've become. Both of us, she corrected. He would have been proud of both of us. Maybe she was right. Maybe wherever he was, Dad understood that both his children had found ways to serve their country with honor, even if only one of those ways could be publicly acknowledged. I got in the car and started the engine, but before I could drive away, Sarah knocked on the window. I rolled it down, and she leaned in close. Marcus, thank you. For what? For trusting me with the truth, for letting me know that my big brother didn't actually fail at anything, for giving me the chance to finally understand who you really are. You're welcome. And Sarah? Congratulations, you're going to be an outstanding officer. I learned from the best, she said with a smile that reminded me of the little girl who used to follow me around our backyard, asking questions about everything, and believing I had all the answers. As I drove away from Fort Campbell, watching my sister's figure shrink in the rearview mirror, I realized that something fundamental had changed. For the first time in over a decade, I wasn't completely alone with my secret. Someone in my family knew enough to understand the sacrifices I'd made, even if they didn't know the specifics. It was a dangerous precedent. Operational security existed for good reasons, and sharing classified information with family members, even partially, even obliquely, violated protocols I'd spent years learning to follow. But it was also liberating in a way I hadn't expected. The weight of complete isolation had been lifted, replaced by something I'd forgotten I needed. Recognition from someone who mattered, that my choices had meaning beyond personal ambition. My phone buzzed with a text message from Colonel Hayes. How was the family event? Everything go smooth? I considered my response carefully. Technically, I should report the security compromise, explain how my cover had been partially blown by chance encounters and family perceptiveness. But looking back at the base in my mirror, thinking about Sarah's face when she'd finally understood the truth about her brother's failure, I made a different choice. Everything went perfectly, I texted back. Family duty accomplished. It wasn't the complete truth. But then again, complete truth was a luxury I'd given up long ago in service of larger truths about duty, sacrifice, and the price of protecting the people you love. Some things were worth the risk. 6 months later, I was in a briefing room at the Pentagon, delivering an after-action report on a counterterrorism operation in Southeast Asia. The mission had been successful. A bomb-making network disrupted, several high-value targets eliminated, and a planned attack on a civilian target prevented. Outstanding work as always, General Morrison said. As I concluded my presentation, the President specifically asked me to convey his gratitude for this operation. Thank you, sir. Just doing my job. Any plans for leave? You've been operational almost continuously for 18 months. I considered the question. When was the last time I'd taken real leave? Time off that wasn't just recovery between missions or preparation for the next deployment. Actually, sir, I have a family obligation coming up. My sister's change of command ceremony. Family. Important to maintain those connections when possible. Morrison's expression grew thoughtful. You know, I've been reviewing your file recently. 15 years of exemplary service, commendations from cabinet-level officials, operations that have directly prevented attacks on American soil. Have you ever considered a transition to a more visible role? The question caught me off guard. Sir? There are positions available that would allow you to use your expertise in a more traditional military capacity. Your experience base is unprecedented. You could write doctrine, train the next generation of officers, provide strategic guidance at the highest level, and it would mean no more deep cover work, no more extended separations from family. It was tempting. The idea of a normal military career, recognition for my service, the ability to tell my family who I really was and what I'd accomplished. No more lies, no more cover identities, no more watching my sister's pride from the shadows. What would that mean for ongoing operations? Your current assignments would be transferred to other operatives. Your knowledge base would remain classified, but you'd transition to advisory and planning roles rather than direct action. I thought about Sarah, now serving as a platoon leader with distinction. About my mother, who's still worried about my mysterious government job. About the possibility of finally living openly as the person I'd become rather than hiding behind the fiction of the person I'd pretended to be. Can I have some time to think about it, sir? Of course, but Marcus, he used my first name, which was unusual in official setting. You've given enough. No one would question your decision if you chose to step back into the light. She was taking over as company commander, responsible for over 100 soldiers and millions of dollars in equipment. At 28, she was one of the youngest officers to receive such a command, and her record showed exactly why she'd been selected. I sat in the same section of bleachers, wearing the same style of civilian clothes, watching my sister assume leadership responsibilities that would have challenged officers twice her age. But this time, the weight of secrets felt different, less isolated, more like something I was carrying by choice rather than obligation. During the reception afterward, Sarah found me standing near the refreshment table, observing the mix of families and military personnel celebrating her promotion. You made it again, she said, seeming genuinely surprised. 2 family events in 6 months. People are going to start thinking you care about us. Always did, just wasn't always able to show it. Any chance you'll make it to Christmas this year? Mom's been planning the menu since August, convinced that if she makes enough food, you'll have to stay longer than a few hours. I thought about General Morrison's offer, about the possibility of a normal schedule that would allow for holiday visits and family dinner. There's a chance my schedule might become more predictable soon. Really? What changed? Maybe I'm getting too old for the travel requirements of my current position. Sarah studied my face with the analytical skills she'd developed as an intelligence officer. Or maybe you've done enough of whatever it is you actually do, and you're ready for something different. She was reading between the lines again, seeing patterns and drawing conclusions from limited information. It was exactly the skill set that made her valuable as an officer and dangerous as a sister with security clearance. Maybe, I admitted. Well, for what it's worth, whatever you decide, you've already proven everything you needed to prove. To me, to Mom, to Dad's memory. You don't owe anyone any more sacrifices. A young soldier approached us then, one of Sarah's new platoon leaders, fresh-faced and eager to make a good impression on his new company commander's family. Ma'am, I wanted to introduce myself to your brother. I'm Second Lieutenant Morrison, one of your platoon leaders. Morrison. The name was familiar, and as I shook the young officer's hand, I realized why. He had the same jawline, the same confident bearing, the same intelligent eyes as General Morrison from the Pentagon. Morrison, I said carefully. Any relation to General Morrison? Yes, sir. He's my father. Actually, he mentioned that he knows you from your government work. Small world, I guess. Sarah was watching this exchange with interest, noting the familiarity in my recognition of the name, the professional courtesy in the young lieutenant's tone. Your father's a good man, I said. You're fortunate to have him as an example. Thank you, sir. He speaks very highly of your work, says you're one of the most dedicated public servants he's ever known. After Lieutenant Morrison moved on to other conversations, Sarah turned to me with raised eyebrows. The general's son knows who you are. It's a small community. Marcus, generals don't speak highly of defense contractors to their children. They speak highly of people who've made significant contributions to national security. She was getting too close to specifics, asking questions that could lead to discussions I wasn't authorized to have. But she was also showing the kind of analytical thinking that made her valuable as an intelligence officer. Sarah, there are things I know, things you can't tell me, questions I can't ask, answers that would require clearances I don't have. She smiled, but her eyes were serious. But Marcus, whatever those things are, whatever you've done for our country, thank you. And if you ever decide you've done enough, if you ever want to step into the light and let people know who you really are, you'll have my complete support. Even if it means admitting that your failure of a brother actually outranks you. Especially then, do you know how proud I'd be to tell people that I learned leadership from one of the most effective officers in the military, even if I didn't know it at the time. That evening, I sat in my hotel room, overlooking Fort Campbell, thinking about choices and consequences, about the weight of secrets and the price of service. My laptop was open to an encrypted email from Colonel Hayes, asking about my availability for a new operation in Central Asia. The mission would require 6 months of deep cover work, operating as a businessman, involved in rare earth mineral exports. It was exactly the kind of operation I'd been running for 15 years. Complex, dangerous, vital to American interests, and completely invisible to the general public. The kind of work that required someone with my specific skill set and experience base. But for the first time in my career, I found myself questioning whether this was work that still required me specifically, or whether it was simply work I'd become accustomed to accepting. My phone rang. Colonel Hayes, probably calling to discuss the Central Asia operation. Marcus? I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Just thinking about the future. Good, because I wanted to discuss something with you. I got a call from General Morrison about a conversation you two had regarding career transitions. Yes, ma'am. He mentioned some possibilities. I want you to know that while we'd hate to lose you from operational assignments, you've more than earned the right to choose your own path. 15 years of exemplary service, over 40 successful missions, contributions to national security that most people will never know about. Marcus, you've given enough. The words echoed what Sarah had said earlier, what General Morrison had implied during our Pentagon conversation. Maybe it was time to consider that the people around me might be right. What would transitioning look like practically? You'd retain your security clearance and knowledge base, but your primary responsibilities would shift to training, doctrine development, and strategic planning. You'd work normal hours, maintain a permanent residence, have the option to build personal relationships without operational security concerns. And the ongoing missions would be handled by other operatives. Marcus, you've trained half the people currently running operations in your specialty areas. Your knowledge and experience would be preserved through their work. I looked out the window at Fort Campbell's lights, thinking about my sister sleeping in her quarters somewhere on base, proud of her new command and confident in her abilities. Thinking about my mother, who'd spent 15 years worrying about a son whose work she couldn't understand. Colonel, if I made this transition, would there be any possibility of more openness with family? Not operational details, but perhaps acknowledgement of service. There was a pause. That would depend on several factors. But, potentially, yeah. Your cover identity was necessary for operational security. But if you're no longer conducting field operations, some of those restrictions could be relaxed. The possibility of telling my family the truth, not everything, but enough for them to understand that their disappointment had actually been their misunderstanding, was more appealing than I'd expected. I'd like to seriously consider the transition. Take your time. This isn't a decision that needs to be made quickly, but Marcus, whatever you choose, know that your service has made a difference. You've saved lives, prevented attacks, protected American interests in ways that matter. That's a legacy to be proud of. After we hung up, I sat in the darkness thinking about legacy, about sacrifice, about the difference between serving in the shadows and serving in the light. Both had value, both required courage, both protected the country and people I'd sworn to defend. But maybe, after 15 years in the shadows, I'd earned the right to step into the light. Maybe it was time to let my family know that Marcus Thompson hadn't failed at anything. He'd simply chosen a different way to succeed. 6 weeks later, I stood in my mother's living room, wearing my dress blue uniform for the first time in over a decade. The silver eagles on my shoulders caught the afternoon light streaming through her windows, and the rows of ribbons on my chest told a story of service that she was finally allowed to hear. Sarah sat on the couch beside Mom, both of them staring at me with expressions that mixed shock, pride and understanding in equal measure. "Colonel Marcus Thompson," Mom said slowly, testing the words. "My son, the Colonel." "Your son, the disappointment," I corrected gently, "who turned out to be something else entirely." "All those years," Sarah said, shaking her head. "All those times I felt guilty about following the military path you supposedly couldn't handle. You were already years ahead of me." "Different paths," I said, "both important." Mom stood up and walked to the mantel, where family photos chronicled our lives in careful chronological order. She picked up a frame that had held my West Point graduation photo, the ceremony I'd never attended, and looked at it thoughtfully. "I'm going to need a new photo for this frame," she said, "one that shows who you really became." "Mom, there are still things I can't tell you. I don't need to know everything." She turned back to face me, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I just needed to know that my son didn't give up, that he found a way to serve with honor, even when we couldn't see it." "Dad knew, didn't he?" Sarah asked quietly. "At the end, when he kept asking if you were safe, he figured it out." I thought about my father's final months, the conversations Mom had described, his questions about my safety and well-being. Had he connected the dots? Had he understood that his son's mysterious government work was something more significant than anyone acknowledged? I think he suspected. He was a smart man, and he understood military culture better than most. The pieces were there for someone who knew how to look for them. "He was proud of you," Mom said firmly. "Even when he didn't understand what you were doing, he used to tell people that both his children were serving their country, just in different ways." Both his children. The phrase resonated in ways I hadn't expected. For 15 years, I'd thought of my service as separate from my family's military tradition, as something that required me to step outside the conventional path they valued. But maybe it had always been part of the same tradition, the willingness to sacrifice personal comfort for a larger purpose. "So what happens now?" Sarah asked. "Are you staying in the shadows, or finally stepping into the light?" "Stepping into the light. I'm transitioning to a position that will allow me to work normal hours, maintain a permanent residence, and actually be present for family events." "You mean you'll be home for Christmas?" "I mean I'll be home for Christmas, birthdays, graduations, holidays, and all the ordinary Tuesday dinners in between." Mom sat down heavily, as if the weight of 15 years of worry was finally lifting from her shoulders. "I don't think I realized how much I've missed you until just now, when I found out I can stop missing you. I've missed you too, more than you know." Sarah stood up and walked over to me, studying the ribbons on my uniform with professional interest. "I recognize some of the combat action, meritorious service, distinguished service. Marcus, what rank do you actually hold?" I looked at my family, my mother, who'd spent 15 years worrying about a son she couldn't understand, and my sister, who'd spent her adult life feeling guilty about surpassing my supposed failures. They deserved the truth, or at least as much truth as I was now authorized to share. Full Colonel, 06 pay grade, 15 years of service, Currently transitioning to a strategic planning role at the Pentagon. Full Colonel. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. You outrank, Jesus. Marcus, you outrank almost everyone I've ever served with. Rank isn't everything. You're doing important work with your company command, different missions, same purpose. But the sacrifices you made, the recognition you gave up, you could have been a general by now if you'd stayed on the conventional path. Maybe, but the conventional path wouldn't have allowed me to do the specific work I was called to do, and that work mattered in ways that general stars couldn't measure. Mom stood up and walked to me, reaching up to touch the eagles on my shoulders with gentle fingers. Your father would have been so proud to see you in this uniform, so proud to know what you became. He was proud, I said. You both were, even when you didn't understand what you were proud of. The afternoon dissolved into conversation, questions and the gradual reconstruction of 15 years of misunderstanding. I told them what I could, about training programs that didn't officially exist, about missions that couldn't be publicly acknowledged, about the weight of serving in silence. They told me about the worry, the confusion, the family stories that now needed to be rewritten with better information. As evening approached, Sarah had to return to base for evening formation. She hugged me goodbye at the door, holding on longer than usual. Marcus, I'm sorry. For what? For doubting you, for thinking you'd given up, for not trusting that there was more to your story than we could see. You had no reason to trust that. The fiction was designed to be convincing. Still, I should have known my brother better than that. You knew me perfectly, you just didn't know who I'd become. After Sarah left, I sat with Mom on the front porch, watching the sun set over the neighborhood where we'd both grown up. The same houses, the same streets, the same sense of quiet suburban peace that I'd spent 15 years protecting from threats most of these families would never know existed. Marcus, Mom said eventually, can I ask you something? Always. Was it worth it? All of it. The secrecy, the loneliness, letting us think you'd fail. I considered the question as thoroughly as I'd learned to consider all difficult questions, weighing not just the emotional truth but the larger implications. Ask me again in a year, I said finally, when I've had time to live a normal life, maintain normal relationships, be present for the people I love. Ask me then whether the work was worth the cost. But right now I can tell you that the work mattered. That lives were saved, attacks were prevented, threats were neutralized. Whether that was worth the personal cost? That's a question I'm still learning how to answer. Mom reached over and took my hand, her fingers tracing the calluses and scars that told their own story of service. I'm proud of you, she said simply. For the work you did, for the sacrifices you made, for the son you've always been, even when I couldn't see it clearly. I'm proud of you too. For raising children who wanted to serve. For supporting us even when you didn't understand our choices. For keeping our family together through everything. We sat in comfortable silence as darkness settled over the neighborhood. Two people who'd finally found their way back to understanding each other, after 15 years of necessary distance. Tomorrow, I would report to my new position at the Pentagon, beginning a career phase that would allow me to serve my country in the light, rather than the shadows. There would be new challenges, new responsibilities, new ways to contribute to national security without sacrificing personal relationships. But tonight, I was simply Marcus Thompson, son and brother, finally home from a very long deployment. And for the first time in 15 years, that was enough. In a world obsessed with recognition, choosing integrity over acknowledgement is the quiet kind of bravery that changes everything. If this story moved you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever made sacrifices that went unrecognized? Have you ever discovered that someone you underestimated was actually carrying burdens you never imagined? Let me know where you're watching from. These stories reach people all over the world. And sometimes the smallest connection can make the biggest difference. If you want to hear more stories about the hidden sacrifices that define real courage, about the people who serve in silence and the families who love them without understanding them, consider subscribing to this channel. Every listener matters more than you know. Thank you for joining me today. Thank you for listening. And remember, the most important service often happens in the shadows, performed by people whose names will never be known, but whose sacrifices make all our freedoms possible. Until next time, this is Marcus Thompson, reminding you that honor doesn't come from being seen, it comes from keeping your promise, even when no one remembers you made it.